Hello there, I'm Nick O'Sullivan. I work at Amazy Labs, and today I'm going to talk to you about translations and multilingual content in the context of decoupled architectures. And in this example, we'll be looking at using Drupal with Gatsby, which is a popular static site generator. I think we've already had one or two talks this morning on it and plenty more to come. Everyone's loving it. So yeah, you'll get acquainted with it if you don't already know. And yeah, if you want to ask me a question or anything afterwards, or find me on Drupal.org, my username and handle is NBAOSullivan. And so yeah, as I said, work at Amazy Labs, been there a bit over a year now. And in previous jobs, I've worked with Drupal 7 and 8 and a bit of 6 over the past 8 years. And the sort of recurring theme in 2020 has been sort of decoupled solutions with Gatsby as the front end and a variety of backends, including Drupal 7, 8, 9, and other CMSs like Contentful, which is sort of a CMS as a service. And so I've had a good bit of experience this year with different approaches to decoupled translations using Drupal and other CMSs. Most of our clients do need their sites in multiple languages. So yeah, we've sort of been focused on that this year. And the motive for this talk and the associated module and Gatsby plugin that I created is just trying to find sort of a unified approach to put my mind at rest, because we've done things like in Drupal 7, there was an existing sort of custom entities used for translating interface text. And yeah, we've had a variety of solutions that we've had to adapt to. And yeah, hopefully this kind of gathers that knowledge. So as I just mentioned, interface and content, I thought it'd be good to just go over the difference of those. And if you've worked in a sort of multilingual Drupal site before, they should be fairly familiar terms. So content translations, everything managed by a content editor or whoever's editing that in Drupal, and other CMSs. And then interface translations are usually created by developers, whether that's in Twig templates, wrapping that in a T function, or like a JavaScript front end, much with the same T function to say, this is a string that I want to be translated at some point. So yeah, the main difference there is you're sort of passing from a developer to a translation team, or maybe just a content editor. So yeah, just to get those two terms clear. So after sort of recently, when I heard DrupalCon was coming up, I wanted to try and combine the knowledge that I've got from an experience from the different projects that have been doing these sort of decoupled multilingual solutions, and try and bring it together in a unified place, because we've sort of managed, as I said, in a Drupal 7 custom entities, Google spreadsheets, just as a quick kind of free solution to that. And so I thought, Drupal 8 has a fantastic way to manage user interface strings. So can we not, leverage that in our decoupled sites? Because we're always having to, whenever we ship or deploy a new feature, there'll be certain interface translations. So for example, the button text like submit, and then that might have to get translated into 9 different languages. And it's a workflow that you kind of need to consider when creating multilingual sites. So the goal was to get Drupal providing the multilingual content so that can be consumed by front end, which is nicely done within core now within JSON API. There are obviously other solutions like with GraphQL API. And also I wanted the ability to manage those interface translations. So we already have that UI within Drupal, and I wanted to be able to expose that and be able to write to it. Now, those aren't entities within Drupal. So it was necessary to create some custom endpoints for those, one to be able to retrieve it and one to be able to add new strings, because usually they're picked up within Drupal from using the T function. And we just needed a way for a decoupled architecture to work in the same way. So I created the decoupled interface translations module, and that's on Drupal.org. You'll be able to use that in projects now. It's early stages, but yeah, that's cool. And then on the Gatsby side of things, so the chosen front end, I wanted to be able to source content from Drupal, multilingual, so every enabled language, which is made easy by the Drupal, the Gatsby source Drupal plugin. However, currently it doesn't support multilingual content without a patch that's been open for a while. But with that, it's all good. And apply the patch and you're able to get multilingual content via JSON API. So that source plugin makes all its requests to the JSON API and then pulls that into Gatsby. And then interface translations, we wanted to achieve that. So for example, again, the submit button, if I was to write the submit label, I want to make that translatable. And also being able to talk from the Gatsby app to Drupal. So being able to post to the Drupal endpoint and have those created within Drupal and being able to manage in the UI. So I created these two modules. So we have the decoupled interface translation there and the Gatsby plugin here, which kind of takes care of a lot of things. So it uses IoT Next, which is an internationalization framework for providing translations in JavaScript. So it could be in Vue, React, and Gatsby. So this plugin's specifically for that. So I've kind of already gone through these couple of slides, so I'll miss it as we do have limited time in these lightning talks. But this is just basically going over content translations and interface translations within Drupal, how those are exposed, and just mentioning that interface translations aren't out the box available via an API. So then the sort of example repo I've got here, you should be able to access this just provide an URL or after the talk. And that's basically just two folders with the Gatsby app in here, which includes that plugin that we've shown you here, and also the Drupal, just a starting point for using the decoupled interface translations. So if you feel interested in this afterwards, you can go on there and give it a go. So now I'll just jump into what we had to do. So to get that content, we're going to need to retrieve that from Drupal for an API. And thankfully, that's all nice and easy these days with JSON API included within core. So that's as simple as enabling the module. And then that exposes various endpoints. So for example, this one, we're listing out the recipes because I've just installed the Umami demo profile to make things a bit easier. So all the data that's necessary is exposed there. And then we need to look at being able to read and write in a similar way. So having a endpoint to retrieve those interface translations and also write them. So that is something, as I mentioned, isn't available out of the box. So I had to look into it and just created this simple module with a couple of endpoints that we can use. So setting up JSON API, making Drupal expose multilingual content is nice and easy. As I said, enabling the module, bit of configuration, obviously, if you're not starting from a demo profile, and there's a guide along how to do that. And just generally with these kind of things, it's good to have an API user to just lock down permissions and things like that. And then over to the interface translations. This is for everyone else enabling this module and contributing to it, if it does seem to be useful. It is kind of like a proof of concept at the moment, but it does work, or at least it does on my computer. And within this module, we've got a endpoint for retrieving the interface translations. And what that looks like is this provides this path, this route that will go and fetch all the interface translations from within Drupal. So this might be a screen that you're more familiar with. And that's a reduced list because it's basically filtering on context, which is something you can pass with strings within Drupal. So we've passed this decoupled translation context. So at this endpoint, we're just filtering by that. And when we're adding any of them via an endpoint that we can post to, I've just got an example here in Postman. We can just pass this to /add, and it's just a basic array of strings, because that's all we need at that one point. We just need kind of source, and then that will go off, and if it exists in that context of decoupled translation, it won't add it. And if it isn't there, then it will add it. And it will give you back some information if you need it. So that kind of covers the Drupal side of things. So we've got our endpoint to retrieve content, and we have an endpoint to retrieve interface translations filtered by that context, because you don't really want to be bringing in all of this. So early on when I was working on it, I was like, yeah, cool, brilliant, got all those interface translations, but I'm like, that's like a lot of data and probably oversharing. So lock that down. So then over into Gatsby, what we want to do, be able to fetch that multilingual content and get it into the sort of Gatsby ecosystem, and that is made easy by the Drupal source plugin. I've linked to the PR here, so you just use that as a patch to the Gatsby source plugin, and then you configure the plugin, and then as with any sort of Gatsby setup, you would run Gatsby develop or Gatsby build, and then within that build sort of life cycle, it will get to a point where it needs to source these nodes. So after enabling the plugin and configuring it, so with your Drupal base URL, so wherever it may be, it then will create these, if you've used GraphQL before, you might be familiar with this Explorer. So it creates the data in a way that can be queried inside Gatsby. So we can see here, we've got a list of the recipes in the different languages. So then what you need to go and do is create pages within Gatsby. So that's probably for another talk by someone else. But so then that would create pages within Gatsby. So here we have the Gatsby app. And based on that data that we've retrieved from Drupal, we can then create these pages and have sort of multilingual switching there. So great. I mean, obviously it's missing out quite a bit, but you've got your page Drupal. Is what's similar to
Nick, you might want to share again. Yeah, you're doing it.
Cool. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, we'd source those, and then yeah, those are available in that kind of Gatsby way. Yeah, data that can be used within Gatsby. So then we can see based on this endpoint that there's translations available then. So then the plugin itself will, let's just get back to here. The plugin that I've created will then pass that to IoT Next, which is the internationalization framework, and allows you to use the T function within your app to basically say, this is a translatable string. Please can you put it into Spanish, German, or whatever the current language is. So what it will do is whenever built, will serve all the source files and extract usages of the T function. So for example, let's have a look at the recipe page. So nice red wiggly line there. And then it will extract those and push those up to Drupal. And then those appear in our familiar user interface with here. So you've kind of got that end-to-end retrieval and parsing, and yeah, you can translate in English, Spanish, whatever the enabled languages are. So that kind of shows it end-to-end. So you've got the translatable strings within your front-end app, and the plugin, the Gatsby plugin that I've created, will scan those, put them up to Drupal. You can then proceed to translate those, and then it will pull them down the next time it refreshes its data. So that's essentially it. And looking at a API, like the GraphQL API, which does provide some advantages if you're in sort of TypeScript world within your front-end applications. It will provide better type inference because it won't be based on content existing. You've got those type schemas, and then interface translations could be managed elsewhere. It might not always make sense to manage them in Drupal, and it will be cool to have a look at added specificity to that context for string source strings. So maybe you could manage multiple Gatsby apps and maybe a Vue app or something like that would be cool. And also filtering by context in the Drupal UI might be might be useful for reasons outside of decoupled translations. Cool. And so just going ahead, if you do tackle a translation project, you've just got to consider who will be translating them, because if they don't have access to Drupal or it's cornered off or whatever reason, you need to know who will be translating and how you can provide those translations to them. And also consider complexity of translated strings. In this example, we just have the basic strings, but obviously you've got to consider plurality, having markup in there, and also context, which kind of refers back to the previous point about what does this string actually mean? Because when a developer's adding that within a component or a page, and then that's passed off to a translation team, there might be something lost in translation. So yeah, getting some kind of context around there would be good. And then also deployment, because obviously as a developer, I don't want to be pushing those interface translations to prod. So think about where those translations are actually going to be pushed, whether it's in UAT and then that goes to prod, so then it can be translated in time for the deployment of the app or something like that. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. That might have been lightning speed. Hope it made some sense. And yeah, let's get on to the questions, I guess.
As I think we are short with time, we can start with Thomas and we can answer those questions at the end because it's 1:50 already.
Cool. Let's go for it.
Thomas, you should be able to yeah.
Yeah, I suppose you can hear me now. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world and which time zone. In this session, we'll talk about Gatsby and Drupal again. It won't be as specific presentation as the previous one. It will be more like a bird's eye view over the landscape populated by Gatsby and Drupal. You obviously know a lot about Drupal. For those who don't know Gatsby, I'll provide some introduction. And we'll look at how tightly these two actually couple. First of all, my name is Thomas Philip. I have a Drupal webshop at vasilando.be. With my other hat, I'm an architect at the Flemish government here in Belgium. I've been with Drupal since 2006. You may know me by the screen name Vasilando. Very open source and fanatical about sustainable architecture and performance. I was born in Czechoslovakia. I live in Belgium, so basically I'm a European beast. What's the plan for the next 19 minutes? We've covered the speaker and on the planning. I'll explain what the aims of this presentation are. I'll introduce Gatsby as a member of the Jamstack family. I'll talk about complementarity of Gatsby with Drupal. That's the core of the presentation. Some personal experience, pros and cons of the two. If we have time, there's an imaginary discussion with a devil's advocate. Summary in one slide. There are some web resources which you can look at later, and questions are always welcome during the presentation or later. So the aims, this is what I want you to believe. Drupal is no longer a stranger to a decoupled architecture. We all know that there are so many front-end frameworks available. Gatsby is just one of them, but I would argue that it's one of those that have the smoothest way of integrating with Drupal. It evolved from a simple SPA, single page application builder, into something much more powerful that can handle very complex projects. But one of the challenges that we have as builders is to decide where is the dividing line between backend and frontend. We've seen it also in the previous presentation. It could be that you decide to not to take over the multilingual functionalities from Drupal and you build it only on Gatsby, but you will lose something. It's easy to overdo it on either side. So let's examine what are the roles of both Gatsby and Drupal. What is the dividing line or the shape of the coupling between these two? And in what conditions Gatsby may not be a good fit. So Gatsby, yeah, if you came here for Gatsby, that's not the right presentation then. We talk about another great Gatsby. It's Gatsby.js. It's basically a front-end framework, a very, very fast one. It's based on React.js. It's been launched in 2016, not so long time ago, actually by our Drupal colleague, Kyle Matthews. And it's a popular project on GitHub. It's one of the most popular Jamstack projects. I'll explain what Jamstack is in the next slide. But before getting to that, if you wonder where the name comes from, just yesterday I got an answer from Kyle himself. He says it is connected to literature. He thought that Gatsby was a great name from a great book about an exciting, dynamic time in world history. That certainly makes you think about the parallels. How does the legacy web look like? What is actually the problem that we are solving here? We always have data living somewhere in a database like MySQL. We have an application that retrieves and manipulates the data and then serve it through a web server. This setup is very common, but it is a bit slow. It has many stages. It has many. It provides many opportunities for attack or a problem, and it is expensive to scale. We do it every day. It's possible, but it can be done in a more simple way. Jamstack is a web development architecture. It's based on client-side JavaScript and reusable APIs. It's built on the concept of static generators that basically take your whole site and build it as a set of static files, HTML, CSS, JS, everything you need on the front end. And that sits on a content delivery network. There are many Jamstack projects besides Gatsby. You may know Next.js, Hugo, Jekyll, Nuxt, and other ones. Yeah, so this is how it looks like. The data are retrieved from APIs. There's a build system that publishes only the static data on a CDN. This is an example from Netlify, but the scheme is generic. What are the benefits? We identified 4 areas. It's for performance, security, easier scaling, and development practice. I'll run through these very quickly. Why better performance? As we said, it's generated only once and it provides static files on CDN. What can be faster? Prefetching of linked pages is built into Drupal, so you don't have to do it yourself. The images load progressively. That saves loading time as well. The responsive image loading is another advantage. Offline access is so easy to arrange. It's a no-brainer. And in default setup, there is no extraneous code fetching. Why higher security? Well, basically, Gatsby offers you less surface areas for attack. You don't have web server, you don't have the backend exposed, and there is no involvement of database at runtime. You still have to secure your data source, for example, your Drupal. That should not be forgotten. Why is it easier to scale? Well, again, there is no database. You don't have to care about replication. It's just files that are hosted somewhere. It's a perfect scenario for serverless hosting, like S3 from Amazon. The CMS instance, because you still have to run your Drupal, can be much smaller, and that means it's more cost effective as well. In many cases, depends on your use case, obviously. You can even switch off the CMS between builds. It really depends, what kind of website are you building. Better development practice. Why? Well, Gatsby has a long list of starters, which are kind of similar to Drupal themes. That's what I thought at the beginning, except that they offer not just the theme, but also the application itself. So it's very easy for you to start a new website of any kind. The development is more targeted. Preview of changes is really slick in Drupal, in Gatsby. Why? Because you don't even have to refresh your browser page. The changes happen immediately. It's easy to plug in a new components. Typically, we use npm for that, and updating is then also trivial. All sources can be approached using a single querying system. That's a huge advantage. There is a GraphQL language used, and there is also an IDE for GraphQL called Graphical, which is included in the local development environment. And the documentation of Gatsby is really, really, really fantastic. You should check it out. What is the complementarity between these two? So let's look, how do they couple? How tightly can they couple? So on the Drupal side, what do we expect? What definitely lies on the side of Drupal are the CMS functionalities, content management, content types, fields, taxonomy, media, importantly, Visvik, everything about editing itself, revisions, content versioning. The multilingual capabilities are very nicely explained in the previous presentation by Nick. Slug generation, the relative URL. It's simple to do in Gatsby, but you may leverage Drupal's module path out for this and get the information via the API, because then you benefit from other backend modules such as redirect and token. But obviously, Drupal needs its own user management and authentication. A crucial building block is the API of Drupal, and that's very efficiently solved by the excellent JSON API. And you can use other back-end modules which improve the functionality as long as they can be transferred via API. What do we expect on the side of Gatsby? Clearly, the front-end, HTML generating HTML, CSS, JS fonts, and so on. The front-end caching, which is built in because it just sits on a CDN. Prefetching is there. Asset optimization for speed. Same for image optimization. So Drupal doesn't have to care for any of these. Then connecting to external sources, you don't have to connect only to Drupal. You can use a number of other CMS if you like, depending on your use case, or APIs from S3 or Google Sheets, Google Analytics. You can use all of them, and you have just one query language to query them all. Structured data annotation, it's also something you don't do in Drupal anymore. You do it in Gatsby, and it's very simple to do. Analytics, the Google Analytics was always one of the first modules we enabled in a new Drupal website. It doesn't belong there. It belongs at the front end, and it Gatsby, it's a couple of lines of code which you copy and configure. External sitemaps, the same, CAPTCHA, robots.txt, security.txt, web mentions, all search engine optimizations, all that is on Gatsby's side, and Drupal is not needed there. What is unclear or imperfect? The end user authentication in Gatsby is easy to implement, but it's more difficult to couple it with Drupal authentication if required. But maybe you don't require it, then you can solve it by using third-party authentication for both Drupal and Gatsby. There are many techniques how to achieve that. Search, again, easy to implement in Gatsby alone, but I find that Drupal's own search configuration using Search API still more superior, so there is definitely room for improvement. Preview, it's fantastic in Gatsby development. There is even a Drupal module that leverages it, but I don't think it's as seamless as in the monolithic Drupal. So this is connected with providing revisions via the Drupal API. We are getting there. Forms, by definition, require backend involvement, but that can be solved using serverless tools like those offered by Netlify. Redirect functionality, so that you don't so you keep the page, keep the link to the page even if the title changes. It's easy to do it in Gatsby, but again, it's more useful to use backend module redirect and use it in Gatsby. This is not yet completely ready, but there are patches for the redirect module that go in that direction. They're almost ready. My experience, you see this big number. This is how long I've been busy with Drupal. When I joined, when I started with it, it was still Drupal 4.6. I've seen so many hip players coming up and vanishing again. And yeah, why would you switch to something else after 15 years? But then, yeah, no, I'm not leaving Drupal anytime soon. I think Drupal is still the best CMS out there. The CMS competition is intensifying, but still, I don't doubt that Drupal is the best choice. But Gatsby is definitely a game changer. Not just the speed, scalability, and all the pros that I mentioned. It's also modern. It's elegant. It's fresh. And it's, for me, it's also an example of a decoupled setup that has more pros than cons. Here's the discussion I mentioned. It's I'll mention the pros, the advantages, with the devil's advocate speaking in red. Performance. We can say that nothing can beat static files on a CDN. You could say that Drupal is also able to cache on CDN and expire from it, but then you have to think about the complexity of the setup. Security, you don't have to worry about Drupal, PHP, MySQL vulnerabilities because you simply don't use them at runtime. You could say that you always have security worries. You can never be completely free of them. Stability, no worries about traffic surges or DOS attacks. True, your site is replicated all around the world on a CDN, but yeah, any site can be crippled by attacks. It's fun to build. Your devs will love you, even that's not deliverable, maybe for some. Drupal can so easily connect to so many other data sources, so not just to Drupal. Okay, there are external entities available in Drupal, but again, the setup is much more complex. You have a huge access to a huge ecosystem of plugins of Gatsby, React, and JS. Do you really need it? Drupal has a lot of modules. Well, you have more quality modules in total than you can pick and choose. Even better. You have also improved access to developers. There are so many React.js developers, so you have less pressure finding Drupal talent. The access to the content is so simple using the JSON API module. There are edge cases like revisions and so on, but the JSON API model is improving constantly. The hosting is very affordable, even free on hosts like S3 or Netlify, GitHub Pages, Azure, etc. One of the ones I find particularly interesting is the Gatsby Cloud. It's because it's so streamlined for Gatsby. You should check it out. If you haven't seen Surge yet, I really recommend it. You basically build your site and then use one command to publish it in the cloud on your own domain. It's really magic. Yeah, I know Drupal can also be run on Raspberry Pi. True. Jamstack hosting companies, they have a number of extra functionalities like cookieless analytics. You don't have to worry about GDPR. There's a Gatsby cache plugin which speeds up builds considerably. Image optimization, which used to be a separate service before, it's just a plugin that is switched on Netlify. But there are many solutions which are comparably easy. What are the disadvantages or drawbacks? Every edit in Drupal requires a rebuild before it appears on the front end. It's simple to automate. It can happen immediately, but it takes time before it's built. The trigger is immediate, but the build not. There's no fine-grained invalidation like cache tags. Since this year, Gatsby offers incremental builds, but even but the front-end refresh remains a challenge for bigger sites over 100,000 pages. Yeah, the question is, do you need to publish everything immediately on your site? It's easy to limit access to pages, but coupling with Drupal roles and permissions is a challenge. Do you really need it, or is it just a nice to have? It's not ideal for sites that focus on authenticated users, but you can still use it on your public sites. Compared to Drupal, you will have less configuration, and you have to do some coding, more coding than in Drupal. You will have to learn JavaScript as a basis, Gatsby for the concept, and GraphQL, but it's really fun, and it's very clear structured. I think another drawback is that Gatsby still suffers from this stigma of a SPA, static generator, based on Markdown files. It's no longer true. You're welcome to check it out. Summary. So we've seen the number of roles which are definitely on one side or the other. There is a middle which is undecided, where we still have work to do. Drupal shines not only as a CMS and an API. It's got the potential of using a lot of backend module functionalities that can be exposed through the API, and very useful in Gatsby frontend. That's also one of the reasons why I find Gatsby Drupal more superior over other CMSs. Gatsby shines on a number of fronts that we mentioned. What are the disadvantages for Gatsby? Gatsby declines in advantage when you have more than 100,000 pages, even though there's been a use case also earlier today in a presentation of a site with 1 million pages. If you need immediate propagation of changes to the front end, it's also a less good fit. And if you need to focus on authenticated users, then you may want to choose the monolithic Drupal or build your own custom front end. So how does the visualization of the coupling look like? Very scientific. Look at this. Here it comes. Yeah. So I think that there is really good match between these two. There are some web resources for you to look at later, and your questions are most welcome either in this interface or on social media. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yay for Gatsby. Great stuff. So we have one question for you, Thomas, from Miro. And he says, do you have any suggestions how to replace layout builder? I guess.
Yeah, good question. I didn't mention that, but this is one of the gray areas. It should be possible to expose that expose the functionality through the API. What do you do with it on Gatsby side is unclear. I guess if you build a Gatsby plugin that can consume the layout, it may work well, but it requires some work. It would be fantastic if that could happen. Yeah.
And would you mind showing the link and resources slide again, if we leave it on that, maybe, just for Peter there? And there was a couple of questions that Miro sent from me too. And he was just talking about the PR for the Gatsby source plugin. They're apparently having some problems. I'm not sure exactly what. But yeah, inherently what it does is it per node that it picks up from Drupal, it makes a request for every language. To JSON API, because JSON API doesn't really provide all nodes for a given language or anything like that. So there is a sort of inherent performance problem there, but we are using it in another client site with like around 10,000 nodes and with incremental builds, which is a feature of Gatsby, and whether that's on Gatsby Cloud or hosting it elsewhere, it's all good. And yeah, there are a couple of performance things that you need to change, but generally okay. And yeah, I think that's us. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Thomas. That was great. And let's look forward to some more Gatsby presentations this DrupalCon. And yeah, enjoy yourself.
Thank you.